It's a very hot day today, so I'm going for a kind of villain on a holiday look with my glass of water, because that's what villains do, staying hydrated. It's kind of rude to wear glasses on the camera, so let's take these off. So anyways, we all love antagonists, or almost all of us, because they're fun. They don't give a fuck about things like ethics or justice or morale or like all this kind of not fun stuff. So yeah, let's talk about creating villains or antagonists. I should have made this video for October, for Halloween. Hello everyone! Welcome to another episode of Visual Storytelling with Olschi. Today we are talking about how to design the villain of your manga story. Very few stories have no antagonist in them. The antagonist poses a kind of threat or a challenge to your hero, and they are usually a very vital part of any story. First of all, let's make a difference between villain and antagonist. An antagonist doesn't have to be evil per se, it can just be a kind of opponent. A rival in a sports tournament, for example. They don't necessarily harm anyone or have any evil intentions. They might be mean, but they're not like murdering people. And then there are actual villains who are considered evil, I guess. They can create a lot of harm to other people or the environment or whatever, so they're not exactly just a threat to our protagonist. And then the antagonist doesn't even have to really be a person. It can be a thing or a horde of zombies. Although if your antagonist isn't a person, it will be a little bit more difficult to cause an emotional reaction within the reader. So let's say you do have a horde of zombies as your opponent. You will probably cheer for the hero to survive, but you won't really care about what happens to the zombies, so it might lessen the emotional impact a little bit. That's why in most zombie scenarios, the actual villains or antagonists are usually people, not monsters. If you create your villain, you kind of have to go through the same steps as with the protagonist. You have to think about their motivation, their wants and needs, their weaknesses, their morale and their approach to reaching their goals. The only difference is that when you design your antagonist, you do have to keep your protagonist in mind. Of all the connections in the character web, the most important is the relationship between hero and main opponent. This relationship determines how the entire drama builds. The antagonist has to challenge your hero. And this challenge can come in different shapes and forms. It can be a physical challenge. For example, an antagonist can have a certain set of skills or powers that challenge the protagonist. And in manga, this alone already might be enough material for having a great fighting scene, for example. Or the challenge can be a psychological one, either moral, ideological, social, etc. Basically not a physical one. For example, let's say in a josei manga, our protagonist wants to marry a man who's 10 years younger than her, and the mother-in-law is the antagonist. So let's say the mother-in-law blackmails our protagonist. She tells like, either you leave my son alone, or I will reveal your dark past. You can have one of the two, and in certain genre only one of the two can actually work. For example, in just the aforementioned scenario where the mother-in-law blackmails our protagonist. In a josei manga, it would be a little bit weird if those two started a fight. Actually, that would be kind of dope. And by the end of the fight, mother-in-law realizes that she was against the marriage because she secretly has feelings for our protagonist. And the heroine says, actually, I only wanted to marry Shinji to be close to you. And then okay, this is getting out of hand. But you know what I mean. Sometimes you can only have a psychological challenge without a physical one. But it's pretty difficult to make a physical challenge engaging if there isn't any kind of moral argument being part of the conflict. So it's always good to add a psychological challenge on top of this physical one, to give it more depth and more engagement. The opponent has to challenge the protagonist's greatest weaknesses. The threat caused by the villain or the antagonist shouldn't be easily overcome. Our hero has to learn and grow in order to overcome this challenge. This growth can take on any kind of shape. It can be having to learn a new skill, getting some kind of artifact, overcoming a trauma, or overcoming a psychological weakness in general. Or they have to take the moral high ground. And while thinking about what kind of challenge the antagonist poses for the protagonist, we also have to not to forget that our protagonist has to challenge our antagonist as well. So it has to be a little bit of a push and pull. But how the antagonist challenges our hero is not the only thing to think about. We also have to think about why they challenge our hero. And that's the motivation part, which might be the most important aspect when you design your villain. What moves the antagonist? What is their goal and why do they want to reach it? What are they willing to do to reach it? How are they contrasted to the hero in their goal and how they want to reach it? We have to establish how the goals and values of our antagonist clash with the ones of the hero. They might have the same goal, like winning a tournament for example, but since only one person can win the tournament, the pro and the antagonist clash with each other. In this case you might ask questions like, why do they want to win the tournament? What are their stakes? Maybe the protagonist needs the money to feed his family, while the antagonist needs to win this tournament to restore their honor. By creating contrasts or similarities, you create tension between our hero and the antagonist, which drives the plot forward. Their goals can also be complete opposites of each other. One of the most simple examples is our antagonist wants to destroy the world and our protagonist wants to save the world. It's simple but effective. But if you give your antagonist this kind of evil goal, the reason behind it or the motivation behind it has to be more than I'm so evil. What experiences or knowledge or beliefs led them to wanting to destroy the world? Give them a background that explains their motivation. The background doesn't even really have to come up, but it's much easier to write a believable antagonist if you understand them and know who they are. So once you have established this motivation, you have to communicate it to the reader. And this can be a little bit tricky. How do you do it without a boring, long exposition scene? You have to think about how to show it without spelling it out. Let's look at an example. For example, you can show them killing someone while saying something like, it's because of scum like you that the cat population is in danger. This way you can communicate various things to the reader. First, we know that this character really cares about cats, or pretends to care about cats. They don't mind murdering people for the sake of cats. 3. We are apparently in a world where the cats are dying. The reader might get intrigued by why are the cats are dying? And why does our antagonist care so much for them? What did the other people do in order for the cat population to be in danger? So with just one simple scene, you can establish a lot, so just think about how to show things. In our world, very few people think that they are the bad guys. The ones who knowingly do harm others do it either of necessity, so they know the things they do are bad, but they still have to do them in order to survive, or they are psychopaths. They simply don't care if they harm anybody. But most people believe they are good people. And you can apply this to your story as well. A villain who doesn't think that they are the bad guy is a pretty interesting character to explore. And it has become quite common in recent years. Those antagonists do think they do the right thing. And in some cases, it might even be true, but the means of reaching their goals might clash with what our hero perceives as the right thing to do. This kind of villain is interesting because the audience understands where the motivation is coming from. Sometimes the audience even want the bad guys to win because of this. The best example would be Thanos from the Avenger movies. He was written so compellingly that suddenly everyone agreed with the dude who basically committed genocide. Thanos believed that he was doing the good thing, that he is saving the world by killing half of the population. This kind of good motivation creates tension, because the reader might not be sure who to root for anymore. The good guy swinging is good, but maybe the villain should win after all? Your villain doesn't have to be complex. Thanos, in my opinion, is a very simple-minded man who doesn't understand how population growth and control of resources work, especially in a capitalistic society. But by being simple, he does speak to a part of us which sometimes thinks, man, humans suck. We all had moments like this. The antagonist gives you the possibility to explore the gray areas of morale. Do the means justify the ends? Do all of us have the capacity to be evil? Yes we do. What does it take a person to become evil? And is it considered weakness or strength to do what is necessary? How complex your antagonist's morality is should also depend on the genre and the target audience you're writing for. Stories for younger readers should probably have more simple antagonists, where it's easy to understand that what they're doing is not good. The older your audience is, the more you can play with the gray areas. The reason why the antagonists are often more popular than the protagonists are things like background and motivation. The hero sometimes simply has to react to the protagonist's action because the antagonist is more active. Basically, the villain decides to do something and then the hero only has to react, prevent the antagonist from reaching their goal. So the antagonist acts, the hero reacts. And this can make the hero boring sometimes. This can happen to the villain of your story as well. Basically, a hero is trying to reach the goal and the villain only wants to stop them, so while the hero is acting, the villain is reacting. This can work if the motivation behind the villain is pretty strong. A mother-in-law not wanting her son to get married to a 10-year-older woman because she's worried about the status of her family has been kinda overdone and probably won't fly with a lot of audiences nowadays anymore. But being opposed to the marriage because she secretly has feelings for the fiancé, well, that's very dramatic, first and foremost, but also gives a little bit of a refreshing story. I don't know how this Josei manga turned into a Yuri, so the tension between your hero and your villain is like a delicate dance that you have to figure out how you want to do. If both are boring, it will be pretty difficult to still write an interesting story. If one of them is interesting and engaging, then it's easy to hook the reader. If both are interesting and have an exciting conflict, then your story might flourish. Another aspect to think about are the stakes. If the antagonist wins, what will our hero and their companions lose? It can be anything from small thing like losing in a tennis match to something big like having everyone you love die because the world is ending. But there is also a danger in setting the stakes too high. For the reader, it's more relatable if the stakes are comprehensible. So even if you have an end of the world scenario, the reader will care more if you have a set of characters that the reader cares about. So what will happen to those characters if the villain reaches their goal? So all the points I mentioned so far are kind of basic storytelling pretty much. You can apply them to anything, movies, books, comics. In manga we can use pictures to show things instead of telling them. Use paneling, shadows, special effects to show the tension between the protagonist and the villain. Think about their facial expressions, gestures, their style, and how is it different to the protagonist. You can either create a contrast between those two or have them certain similarities on purpose. You can also make them obviously evil, misleadingly innocent, or somewhere in between. The looks seriously don't matter that much. Obviously, a compelling and interesting character design is important, but there is no specific formula for character design. This applies to your protagonist as well as the antagonist. There are no real limits to what you can do. I guess one rule could be is not to make the design overly complicated, because you will have to draw it over and over, just the same as with the protagonist. But then again, if you want to torture yourself, go for it. The impact will be impressive, for sure. Creating your villains gives you more freedom to explore ideas than pretty much any other character in your story. Maybe that's why audiences do often like villains more than they do the protagonists, because there are less boundaries for them, so that they just can do whatever. It's like vicariously living through others. It doesn't mean that we want to do bad shit in real life, but sometimes it can be fun to watching fictional characters doing bad shit. I guess. And even in real life, sometimes morale can be pretty complicated. One thing we do today that we think is good might be bad in a couple of years. So my favorite kind of villains are the ones who make me ask, could that be me? Could I have done the same thing if I had the same kind of circumstances? Or could I actually imagine hanging out with the character if they weren't a murderer? So a good villain does not only challenge your hero, they also challenge the audience in a way. So tell me, what are your favorite villains? Or at least what villains are most memorable to you? Leave a comment because I'm really interested to hear what you say. So this is it with this month's video. Before I finish this off, I want to make a little announcement. You can finally pre-order volume 2 of my manga. You can do it until end of this month. There are some extra goodies that you can receive only if you pre-order the book, so check out the link in the description box below. The book is in German though, for those of you who do not speak German. Maybe one day there will be an English version of the manga, I don't know, but right now I can't really do that. So thank you for tuning in. Meanwhile, you can follow me on my social media like Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, and I would also like it if you subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so yet, and also a thumbs up button always helps me out as well. Hope you can somewhat enjoy the summer in the sun and not die from heat, and I will see you in about a month with the next video. Until then, thank you for watching, see you, bye!